Good morning, everybody. See you trickling in. Okay, great. Welcome to our virtual webinar series. My name is Val Lance-Geffro, and I am the Director of Communication Education at the Sanford Institute Center for Compassionate Communication. This is our second episode in this series, and we hope that you'll also join us on October 14th as we delve into media interview training. We'll share more about that at the end of this session. But today, we're thrilled to welcome two spectacular leaders in mediation skills, Dr. Rosetta Bobo, who works as a consultant around the country with universities, state and local groups, medical schools, courts, justice departments. And she's joined today by Dr. Lisa McBride, Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at the Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth College. Beyond her substantive work in higher education, Dr. McBride began her career as a police officer, and she served as an undercover operative with the Justice Department. So you both bring a broad perspective to this important topic, and we're really thrilled that you're here today. Dr. McBride's right hand, Jerome Wilcox, is helping to facilitate our meeting today, as well as my teammates, palliative care Dr. Gary Buckholtz, and our brilliant admin, Norma Nava. As you're listening today, please feel comfortable putting your thoughts and questions in the chat so that even in this virtual format, it can feel like an interactive conversation. Okay, Rosetta and Lisa, I'm going to throw this to you.
Well, thank you so much, Val. Thank you so much. And thank you for introducing Rosetta and me. We're excited to share the next 60 minutes with all of you. This is going to be an interactive webinar, as Val mentioned. And please use the chat feature throughout the presentation as we will pose various questions to you to reflect on facilitation and mediation. And so Rosetta, as she will jump in a little later here, oftentimes says that facilitation and mediation are words that are used interchangeably. So you will hear today us using facilitation and mediation interchangeably. So thanks, Val, for sharing a little bit about my police story there, because as a former police officer and federal agent, and also university ombudsperson, conflict I recognized early on in my career as a natural part of the workplace, the classroom, and even in your family interactions. And so disagreements are always going to arise, and whether or not it's a clash of personalities or competing priorities or a communications breakdown, you're then left to resolve the unresolved. So conflict is going to happen, right, Rosetta?
That's correct. And I think the part you need the most important is that you recognize we have more in common than we have in differences. And when we start talking about having conversations and talking, we often talk, but do we hear, do we listen? And we often, if you look anywhere in the workplace, anywhere in the world almost, and even in your households, your personal lives, there's often conflict. You're going to have some level of conflict in some process where, you wish you just had the right words to say so you could move this conversation forward. So hopefully today we can do that by basically recognizing the core principles of mediation and reflecting on communication, active listening, but that becomes a very important part as to how do we active listening, especially with so many distractions right now. We can have an appreciation to observe conflict resolution and strategies and recognize when mediation is the right tool to use, because we often get together, we have conversations, but sometimes we need another party to come in and have that conversation with us to at least facilitate the discussion to move it forward.
So Jerome's going to go to the next slide, because that is really our learning objectives for the day that Rosetta just shared with us. So Jerome, thank you so much. So I'm going to talk a little bit next about a question that we're going to pose. But before we do, I want you to think about mediation, what a mediator does, a facilitator. They basically act as a third party, a neutral third party who facilitates discussion and guides parties towards a mutual agreeable solutions. I would say in the 20 years I've been doing mediations, I'm sure Rosetta would agree, sometimes you just can't get to that sweet spot of mutual agreement, but you can get to a sort of middle of the road where there are issues that couples, if it's divorce, or in our university system, we move students and faculty towards some type of resolution and a roadmap. So our first question is something that we want you to utilize the chat if you can. And that question is, what challenges do you have in communicating? Remember now, when I say what challenges do you have in communicating, that is in your work, in your classrooms, if you are a faculty member or student, and within your own family dynamics. What challenges do you have in communicating, and what concerns brought you to this workshop? I recognize that you have busy lives, but the fact that you came to this workshop means that you are a authentic leader, and you recognize and have self-awareness that communication is a big part of who you are and who we are all on this chat today. So what challenges do you have communicating, and what concerns brought you to the workshop?
I don't know if you can see the chat, but one of the participants said effective ways to create time to discuss.
Oh, that's great.
And another person said people pleasing is a challenge for me, and I will second that emotion.
Those are both great, and I think we'll kind of touch on those as we go through the day about, finding time and trying to please people in conversations. Because many times that's just not going to happen, but you still need to get through with the conversation.
Having difficult conversations is what Desiree mentioned, people pleasing, and so these are all good. People who disagree with individuals, as Heather's mentioned, expressing myself in a way that can be heard by others. I mean, these are all excellent sort of answers. Fear of negative outcomes. I mean, I'm with you, Pamela. I mean, one of the things that I think we all struggle with is information overload, right? We're all trying to communicate, but we have all these tugging. It's like a tug of war where we got data, we got digital communication, we got social media, internet. So we get overwhelmed, and we can't process some of these things.
I like Cindy makes a statement that effective ways, to react. And I always tell people one thing about conversations is that we're not in control of what people say to us, but we are in control of how we react to it. So those are special skills that you basically learn how to hone in on when you're working with people and talking to people as to, I can't control what you say to me, but I can control how I react to it.
So Rosetta, you bring that up, and 5% is what the communications difficulties are. 95% is how we react in terms of our reflective listening, active listening skills. So let's focus on the 95% today. Is that okay with you? Let's go. Next slide, Jerome. So, from the research perspective, the CPP Global Human Capital Report really dives into looking at 5,000 employees across nine countries, Europe and America. And what they found is, in essence, is that employees in the workforce spend approximately 2.8 hours per employee per week. I know I got some mathematicians on here. That's a lot of time dealing with conflict. 2.8 hours is spent by employees dealing with conflict. That is a big amount of time that we are working our full-time jobs. And we know we spend more time at work than we do with our families, but we know that time is money, and there are a variety of direct costs to an organization who has to, associate with conflict and poorly managed conflict for that variety of reasons. So poor communications cost universities and businesses about 1.2 trillion annually. And so that negative impact, it reduces our morale, it distracts us, we get frustrated, we feel stressed, and some of you even mentioned this in the chat. So you're right on target, the impact of conflict.
And I think that we talk about this in the workplace, but this is also a big issue as well in your personal life as to how you deal with what happens with conflict and what happens with communicating. And I think one of the biggest issues now to me with research, I mean, in engaging in research is the fact that what happens with communication, because we spend so much time on our in social media on our phones, we don't, and sending text messages, we communicate totally different than we did before we had all these gadgets to communicate through. And I think in that process, you ask yourself the question as to when you're talking about communication, you say, you know, when you hear the word communication, when you hear the word mediation, what do you think when you hear those words? You know, I remember when I first heard mediation, I really thought it was meditation. The T was missing. I said, well, you know, it's meditation. But I recognized over the years that if we would take the time to pause for a moment, like we are meditating on something and think about what we're about to say, it would take us to a more common ground of communicating. And that part we look at as we find ourselves hearing the word mediation. That means that third party coming in to mediate the conversation, be it a mediator, be it a facilitator, be it someone who just showed up and said, you know what, I can help you out with this discussion. And when you start talking about communicating, the word communication, it's, you know, we all can sit when we hear things, but are we really communicating? And I think that's what creates a lot of the frustration in the workplaces, because you hear conversations going back and forth and you can hear a conversation, but are you really communicating, or are people just talking? And you can go to meetings and you'll sit there, you say, how was it? Well, we talked for an hour, and you say, that's what we did. We just talked for an hour. And sometimes when you leave, you say, I really wish we had communicated and gotten to an understanding from that process. And I noticed in the chat, many of you, someone did make the statement that leaders are not listening. And we'll talk a little bit more about how do we listen. But these two words are intertwined with each other when you start talking about talking. I hear you, you hear me, let's understand each other. And it's really about we understand, not just I understand, but when you got clear communication, both parties understand what's being said. Forward the slide, Jerome, if you would. In order to achieve progress through mediation and communication, you must listen. And it's easy to test if you can hear. It's hard to test if you're listening. So when you start talking about you must listen, you walk in a room, you say something, everybody look up, yeah, they heard you, but did they listen to anything you had to say? They heard you. So to be heard is easy. But in that process of communicating, you got to be open to listen to what the person is actually saying. Be attentive. Too often, and I noticed recently when I go to restaurants, I always look around at the crowd and I see people who are out in dates and together. And most of the time, both people are on the phone. They got their phones going. So being attentive means giving you my undivided attention, or at least looking up every now and then when you're talking. Being patient with the conversation, because sometimes when you want to communicate, it becomes very difficult. So if it's a difficult conversation, to at least say what you got to say. So you got to be patient with the person trying to tell the story, and then having empathy and eliminating the barriers around you that's stopping you from understanding. I know, Dr. McBride, you've done some work with empathy. You want to share what you found in that process?
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Rosetta, for that. One of the things I've found is being an empathetic listener. What does that mean? I mean, basically, if you're empathetic, and that's a powerful word when you say I'm empathetic. I like to think that I'm empathetic, Rosetta, but empathetic listening is a deep level of active listening where the listener focuses on understanding and sharing the feelings and perspectives of the speaker. And that's a little thing, this one thing that we will focus in today. And hopefully you can practice after you see the role play by putting yourselves or the individual putting themselves in the speaker's shoes. And the Association of American Medical Colleges 10 years ago actually went in and did a research assessment and found that there was a compassion and empathy crisis in healthcare. And they actually conducted, looked at this from 32 different medical schools around the world, including Canada and Australia. And they showed unequivocally that compassionate communications matter across the board in academic matters, no matter your role. And what they really found, which I found just astonishing, was that they documented a decline in empathy among healthcare providers, particularly across medical education, contending with medical students, where their empathy decreased as they progressed through their career. So that to me speaks to where and why we need more trainings like today, because you can't really understand whether or not you're empathetic unless you took the Jefferson empathetic assessment, which is more or less the premier international tool that has been validated. The Jefferson scale of empathy is an internationally known instrument that validates and measures your empathy. But listening with empathy is important for you to build trust when you're talking about facilitating a dialogue or a mediation.
And I think that part goes with understanding the communication strategies and mediation process can de-escalate the dispute. And it goes back to, we're going to continue to talk about active listening, because you've got to be an active listener in order to communicate. Another thing is to identify the root cause of the conversation, because happens often, people will come to you with one thing and you think that's what the problem is. And mediation is a wonderful process, because what happens is that you can at least get to the root cause, because someone may come in and say, you know what, I don't like the way my neighbor's water came over onto my property. That may be what they came to mediation with. Well, truth be told, that's not why they're there. They're there for maybe the way the neighbor parked their car in their yard, or the way that something happened in the neighborhood, or something happened has nothing to do with why you're there. And often people will come to you with one conversation, but there's another conversation, but it's the real issue and the root. But you got to find the root cause as to why we're here, focusing on the facts and underlining stories. It reminds me so much of when I'm doing divorce mediations. People will often in divorce mediation, depending on where they are in that process. Many times the two couples will not even come in the room together. I don't want to see him any longer. I don't want to see her any longer. I don't want to see them any longer. I just want to do it separately down the hall. So I always laugh to myself, and you just spent 20 years together and now it's time to separate. And the two of you all won't even sit in the room and say hello to each other. We get to that point sometimes because we've not talked. We've not had these conversations. And you may go through your entire life hearing people, but not listening to them. And when you're doing the mediation process, you have to learn how to repeat sometimes what the person says. Just paraphrase it and say it back to them. That often helps people when they're listening and when they're talking. And when the person who's speaking, it helps them to understand that you understood what I said, or you're understanding what it is I am saying. And that's using your communication techniques as it relates to just listening to what's being said. The mediation process, basically, we'll talk more about that. It's a process where I guess you should ask the question, have anyone ever been to mediation? Because if you've ever been to mediation, that's a process where you go and you have another person, and you can call it mediation, you can call it something else. And I think if you're a parent and you got children, you've mediated many processes. You may not have had the formal word mediation, but you facilitated the discussions for many things to bringing the two parties together to come to a common ground. So you, at the end of mediation, you have a win-win. It's about, I don't lose, you don't lose, I don't win, but we both feel comfortable about where we are in this process.
And Ira, I hear you with the empathy, how you're defining it. So I'm going to speak in terms of leadership, right? You're leading with humility. You have a humble heart, and you are able to, again, be able to put yourself and walk in the shoes of that person. And I know that's a big definition for empathy, but that's one of the reasons why a lot of employers, universities, particularly in academic medicine, are moving towards that Jefferson empathy test, because they're trying to discern when an employee comes into their organization, do they have the ability to have that empathetic heart? And I encourage you, if you have an opportunity, to take that test, and that would give you an assessment. But one of the things that in mediation, and I look at this from twofold. When I was a police officer, I was a mediator in the community, so we could avoid people going to jail. We would mediate their incidents if it wasn't a violent act. So when we talk about mediation, we often talk about what is in our way. So I want you to think about that. What is in our way? What I use as an analogy, and Dr. Bobo, she loves this, is imagine if you were driving and you were on US 1 and you saw some rocks in the road. What would you do? You would probably say, I'm going to try to get around those rocks. I got to get home to my family. And so when we say rocks in the road, we're referring to common obstacles or impasses. And that's what we hear in mediation. We say we're at an impasse that can stall or derail the process. And so if you think about more experienced facilitators and mediators, they are trying to uncover those, move those rocks out of the road, and they go slow, and they make sure that they list them for the individuals. And so I want you to think about, just quickly in the chat, think about what rocks in the road have you had in disputes or conflicts, or what barriers led to the getting to a mutual agreement. I'm just curious myself, if you could think about this analogy when you're in conflict. Just start saying to yourself, there are rocks in the road. I got to slow down. I got to have a humble heart, and I got to be an empathetic leader. So I'd love to see the chat of what are some of your rocks in the road.
And when you find these rocks in the road, what happens often is that it does create issues with how you react to them, because it goes to the point where body language, it's like when you're in a conflict and somebody have really said something that, you know what, I just don't like it. I don't think sometimes we recognize just how much our body, our facial expression, our eye contact has an impact on what we've said, what we've heard, and how we react to it. And sometimes we react without ever opening our mouth. Our mouth never opens, but people know exactly, or feel they know how you're feeling. So your facial expressions and your emotions can make a big difference in how you react without your mouth ever moving at all. So you got to be intentional about your process. Your body language does say a lot, but be intentional about listening and be intentional about how you react to it. And I've seen several comments about how your boss acts to it, your leader, the leadership reacts or act to it. And you can't control how they react to it, but you can ask for an audience to have a conversation. And when you ask that audience to have a conversation, go in it with clear intentions and be very intentional about what it is you want from that process. Because what will happen often is that your director, your boss, your leader will say, I don't have time for this. Because and then you feel bad because you feel it's making you like a smaller person, because you got an issue that needs to be addressed. So you need to figure out in that process, can we have this conversation? Can you listen to me? Can you be an active listener for what I'm trying to say? But I always tell people, when you're dealing with people who are short on time for conversations, be very deliberate in how you take the conversation with them about how you want to talk. And make certain that your social distractions, the social media, all those distractions can be things that will not be right there to distract from the conversation. Dr. McBride, you had mentioned something to me earlier about social distractions and about how it had impacted someplace.
Yeah, but I love what the chat is what Pamela's saying about when people yell. It takes the rock, and that rock is hard to move sometimes. So I agree with you, Pamela. And also time. Time can be a rock. I mean, it takes us a lot of time to actually address things in real time. And I think that's what you're saying as well. But even Jennifer's talking about that emotion. Looking at the deeply rooted conflict, which may have been going on for over a year. And it's a fight, as she says, is it my fight or a fight that's activated? And so when you talk about social media, and then that's what you were saying, Rosetta, about social media is a distraction for us. When you talk about time in the chat, it takes time to communicate. So social media is a distraction at work. We lose focus. It reduces our efficiency. And it costs businesses, $650 billion, because people are at work basically on social media. And there's no doubt that social media has become an integral part of our lives, all of our daily lives, but it impacts our focus and productivity. and the productivity of us is undeniable. So what the research shows that on the average person spends about 2 hours and 31 minutes per day on social media. And that's something that I try to make sure I often try to stay away from with social media. I'm old school. I just turned 60, so I'm just turning it off, so to speak. So when you talk about social media, it's a distraction externally because we're getting notifications. Some of us are getting notifications as we're on this chat today, on this Zoom, from Apple, from your Instagram. And so these external distractions of social media and all internal, where we get so many messages. I mean, I like to think in my world, in my office, I get just in real time hundreds of emails, and I thought, wow, this is a distraction. So Rosetta, thank you for, sort of pointing that out.
I want
Social
to say another piece about that, about what someone in the chat made the statement about triggers. We all have triggers. There's always going to be something that triggers us. And I think when you're trying to communicate, you got to know what those triggers are and know how to react to them. Don't put them on the table up front, because this is little things sometimes that can bother us. It's like tapping this right here won't bother you, but if I have to hear this all day, it would send me over the edge. So know what those things are, and know it's probably not a direct impact on you, but if culturally this is what you have gone through over the years, and this is what you have become as a person, this can make a difference as to how you react when you hear something. What we're gonna do a quick role play of what a conflict can look like between two parties. And I won't give you a whole lot, just watch the role play and you can, you see this piece. But while you're watching it, think in terms of how people react or interact with each other when they're when they have a commitment to what their issues may be. So think in terms of that. Also think in terms as what these two people are conversating, but at some point they may need a mediator. Think in terms of what that mediation may look like. And let's say mediator, let's say a facilitator to come in and help with the discussion. See if you see any points during their discussion where the whole idea of what mediation and communication looks like, how we can pull this into this conversation. So let me have Val and Gary.
We're
Oh, Val,
on.
we got to talk. We need to make some decisions for Dad, and I'm glad that this tube is being offered, because I need some more time with him. We need more time.
I mean, are you even like I can't believe you're even thinking about this. How are you even thinking about
Well,
this?
I mean, the doctors are offering it, Val. They wouldn't offer it
Doesn't
if they
that
didn't think it
the
might be helpful.
doctors, we have a relationship. I mean, that this is not what Dad wanted. How many conversations over the years have we
I don't
had?
know that. I don't know that. I'm
Oh.
not in these conversations. I'd like to be in these conversations, but I'm typically not
Well,
in
you
them.
are more than welcome to be in these conversations.
I
These
would
are
love to be in San Diego, but my family's in Boston. I would have made a different choice, but I needed to move to Boston with my family.
Oh,
And I would love to be there. And I appreciate that you've been there for Dad, but he's my dad too.
I know he's your dad. And because of that, you should know that the last thing that Dad ever wanted was to be hooked up to a machine or tubes or any of that goes so against what he ever wanted in his life.
Yes, but we need more time, Val.
More time for
I,
what? What
I,
time?
under, I
Time.
understand what you're saying, but I need
He
more
is
time.
in pain. You need more time. I'm sorry that you need more time. I'm
Well,
sorry that this situation is not convenient in your life.
it's not all about you, Val.
Wow. I know it's not about me. You think I wanted any of this to happen? This is about Dad. This is about what Dad wanted, what his wishes have been all through his life.
Okay,
Don't
you're right. You're right. It's about Dad. But we need to make a decision together.
Well, how do you propose doing that? We have completely different perspectives on this.
You're right. We disagree, and I don't know. Maybe we need a third party. to help us.
Okay. Let's come at this point now where Gary, you feel you need a third party to help. Val needs to agree upon that third party. Val, do you want a third party to help?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how we're gonna work through this. I mean, we are in completely different camps here, and this is literally like the wishes of our dad. I just I don't know how we get through this.
Okay, and this happens, and I'm coming in as that third party to talk and being the facilitator or the mediator, whichever one you want. But Val and Gary, if you're going to facilitate a discussion with two other parties, you need to get those two parties to agree that we both want that other person there. Then they have to agree we want that person, because what you don't want to do is go into a discussion where you got a facilitation going on and where Val may feel I'm her best friend, or Gary may feel I'm his best friend. So naturally, the other party is going to feel I'm biased because I'm friends with one of the other people. And it doesn't say that you can't be friends and still facilitate the discussion, but you got to at least be non-biased in the discussion and not have sides one way or the other. So sometimes it does help when you don't know the parties that well, because that way you don't have any background information from that process. You at least can have that conversation when both parties come to the table. So if Val and Gary both agree that they will allow me to facilitate this discussion, the other most important part for me in this discussion is the confidentiality. I don't want to, you got to convince the parties. I'm not going to go out and talk about the issue that you all are having, whatever those issues may be. Because one of the things with people having people in their conversations, they don't want to hear it repeated next week someplace else. So I've got to have my confidentiality that I will not discuss this beyond this point. Be you a mediator or facilitator, you're not a gossiper. So what you don't do is go gossip about what has happened in this process after you finish. So when you bring the two parties together, you come up with what that's going to look like if both parties are going to have this discussion. So I'm walking in the room now with Val and with Gary, because I don't know the story as a facilitator. I don't need to know a lot about it. Gary or either Val came to me and said, listen, we having some real serious problems. Could you come and help us with the discussion? I say, yes, I'm in the room now with Gary and Val, and I want to know, which one of you all would like to tell me why we're here today?
Well, I mean, I think we're here because we need to make a decision for our dad, and this isn't a circumstance where we can just agree. I mean, sometimes you can agree to disagree, maybe, but this isn't one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think this is our decision. I think this is a decision that our dad made and expressed throughout his whole life. And now Gary
Well, not
feels
to
like
me.
it's suddenly our decision. It's not our decision. It was his decision.
Well, he didn't express those things to me. He may have expressed them to you. I get that.
So
Yeah.
my question to you, Val, and I guess this your father expressed it to you, I guess I'll ask the question, did you have anything in writing?
No, I mean, we never went through that step, I think there was always the assumption that, that I would be the voice of his will, that I
Okay,
would be able to express to Gary and be trusted that this was what he wanted. But I
okay.
mean,
Now, Val, you spent most of the time with your father, am I correct?
yeah,
You've been the major caretaker for him during this process?
yeah. I mean,
Okay,
for
let me
years.
let me stop there and say something. What I just did. I did something I should not have done. I
Oh,
asked that she have something in writing. So what I'm doing is giving Gary some ammunition where if it's not in writing, we can do what we want to do. You don't want to put more into the conversation than what should have been there. So I should have made that statement. Do you have something in writing? Because I'm coming to a legal piece. So as a mediator, you don't bring those things into the conversation. You allow whatever's happening among the parties, let the parties have that conversation. Don't put, because my thought is, well, if you don't have it in writing, it can go either way. Well, it's really not my business what they decide upon want in the long run of this process. It's between the two of them. So I need to allow Gary and Val to continue this conversation. But I asked the question, you have anything in writing? And when you make mistakes in conversations with people when they're trying to resolve the issue, just see if you can bag your way out of it the best you know how. Well, Gary, how do you feel about, what your dad told Val he wanted?
Well, I just wish I would have been in those. I mean, I know you're challenging whether I trust you, Val, but I just, and I do, but I just wish I would have been in those conversations. I know I'm not physically there, but it's not that hard to get me on the phone. And I don't know. It sure would be easier maybe had I been in those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, those conversations were had, without any frame of reference of when this was going to actually transpire. We didn't expect him to have a stroke, we didn't know that this was coming so soon. I would have loved to have had a crystal ball and said, okay, we need to document this conversation. It's just life doesn't happen that way. And, I don't know.
And and pause a second. In spite of the fact we're facilitating this discussion, this is a very hard conversation, in my personal opinion, because you're dealing with some real emotions here. You're dealing with a life and death situation as to how can we facilitate this discussion further that they will come to an agreement. Because you got to be careful when you're the facilitator not to let your emotions get in the mix of it. And what has happened sometimes in this process is that if it has happened to you, naturally you start thinking differently, especially you've had it, because I see in the chat, someone say it just happened. If it's happened to you, you sometimes have a difficult time carrying this conversation, because if it happened to me, I will say, I'm really on Val's side. I would probably, in the back of my mind, I'm saying, well, Gary, you've been in San Diego and Boston, and you can't let your bias come in the middle of this conversation when you're helping people facilitate the discussion. So you allow Gary and Val to continue discussing it as long as they can discuss it. But when you see they're not getting to a wrap of anything, I would probably take this conversation to this point now. Well, Gary, how much time do you think you can spend with your dad at this point? And I'm not taking sides, but since it's not, I need to ask Gary, since he wants this to be prolonged, how much time can you spend, Gary, with your father at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I'm ready to, I've talked with my work about taking a leave, and I know things are serious with Dad, and I'm ready to spend some time there. My wife's supportive. She's gonna let me kind of drop everything and be there. So that's my plan.
So Val, how do you feel about Gary's desire to spend more time at this point?
I mean, I think that would be great. I could use some help, frankly. And I just don't know what spending time means. Are you talking about, a few days? Are you talking about a month? Like what is time to you, and that you could realistically be here?
So let's talk about, Gary, what time means to you. Let's talk about Val, what that time, what your needs are for the time he wants to spend. Because what's happening now is that Gary and Val are putting their issues on the table. We're allowing them to find their own agreement as to where they're going with this. Gary said he wants to spend more time. Val say, well, what is time? Gary needs to define what time is. Val's going to get to what that looks like for her and if that will work for her. So at this point, you hear the conversation, you say, you know what, we're moving towards somewhere. We're moving forward. So you're moving forward in the conversation. Now, whether they reach an agreement or not, but at least they're having a conversation about time. Now, you may end the conversation where you don't have an agreement, but you at least have two people who can talk to each other. And sometimes that's all you're going to get out of a facilitated discussion, is the ability for people to talk to each other after that process is over. So you may not have anything in concrete writing, but you at least have something where two people are talking. And the whole idea of mediation, facilitation, and conversation is to get people to communicate on a level they can go somewhere in that conversation. So Gary and Val, we done. I don't need to take you all any further. I do hope that you all get together and finishing it. So, I'm sorry you all did not reach a complete agreement, but I do hope this will take you forward in discussing further what the needs are for you yourself, for each of you, as well as for your father. And that's showing empathy. I just put some empathy in that. I hope this works out for you, and everything will be okay in the end. And you end the conversation. That's it. That's what a facilitated discussion looks like.
And so Rosetta, someone put it in the chat about how does that look when you are close to it and you say you work at an institution, a university, and you have a vested interest in the outcome based on policies. And how do you respect that? So most universities have a university ombudsperson. I mentioned that in my introduction. And so that person is, reports to the system level and they're neutral. So they are normally called in if your institution doesn't have a ombudsperson, but most of them do for faculty and staff related issues. If you are in the midst of the conflict, you're really facilitating through still being advising the parties about what policies and procedures are relevant at your institution. And so you're not going to violate, for example, the CBA for faculty or and that's the collective bargaining agreements. So you're always going to have those policies in front and allow the parties to be advised. Because I've learned doing so many, and Jerome will agree to this. We had a mediation with 15 faculty and 12 students. And so we had to be aware that we have these policies on the table, and most of the party members did not even know what regulations and policies were in place. And from there, then we were able to move rocks out of the road based on, we know that we can't do this because it's against the California, state statute or our institution's policy. So I think you're in a better position, Rachel, if you are in the institution, because you can lean on those policy and procedures.
Right. And I think sometimes in the conversation, Dr. McBride, is that when you start with those policies, you want to start when you're dealing with any conversation or discussion, try to get an agreement on something up front. Try to at least get something at the beginning of the conversation, because that way you can at least see some level of moving forward that we can agree upon one thing. You may not be able to agree on everything, but if you can get something up front the first time to agree, then you can see the conversation going. If you got the policies, what you got to agree upon with the policies, if those are the university policies or the agency's policies, that's your start right there, because you can't circumvent the policies. They may be the rocks in the road. You're going to have to figure out how to step on top of them, or how you're going to have to engage them in the process of where you're going.
Well, ask Jerome to resume the PowerPoint so we can talk about, your story. And your story creates communication style. But when you talk about your story, we all have a story. We all have a role and background that we bring to this work. Your background plus your life experiences and equals your communication style. So when I talk about communication style, fundamentally, it is shaped by your background and your life experiences. My life experience as a police officer, my life experience as a growing up in Ferguson, Missouri, and you may be familiar of sort of what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, a small town outside of St. Louis. It's not a fixed trait, but a learned behavior, influenced by a complex mix of factors from our upbringing to now our professional life. And a lot of this we witnessed in our childhood, especially those of your parents, your siblings. If you look at what place you are, if you have other siblings, what place are you in the sibling pecking order? If you were firstborn, you already had taken a leadership role. And so that is what I mean when I talk about your background, your life experience is going to really relate to how you facilitate dialogue, how you mediate between each other. You're going to lean into your background, your life experiences, and some of those are really going to be helpful to maneuver these really difficult conversations that we have in our country today.
And I think, Lisa, you made one statement about your background. If I look back over how I communicate with people, and I accredit it to my upbringing and my family, and I'm the youngest of seven. And I know why I communicate the way I communicate, being the youngest of seven, because I had to get in where I fit in. And so when I'm communicating with people, when I'm having a conversation with people, I jump in, I'll talk over you. I don't even think about it. It's like, I had to do that with seven people older than I. So once I got in, I had to keep going. So you'll learn that you'll recognize you need to sometimes readjust what your life experiences have brought you if you want to at least have a great outcome for how you communicate with other people.
So when you we talked about this in the chat. Someone mentioned manage your time for this communications with all these competing priorities and responsibilities that we have. We have to manage our time. We need to clarify the goals and priorities with your senior leaders. You almost have to manage them in terms of, sitting down and always communicating. If you can have can reduce the friction, have some type of communication that's proactive, where there's no delays, because as we work in a ever changing environment in our workplace and managing things within multi-generational families, we have to just value the need for conversations and the process. And so we know there's going to be potential delays, but what I do is I schedule dedicated time for communications. And I know that sounds like, wow, what do you mean? You got to schedule it? Yeah, I mean, if you've ever been married, you better schedule it if you want to live and have a great marriage. And you got to learn to say no. And so you got to have some time blocked aside, because we know we have juggling multiple tasks. And so what I call my time is wind down at 9. You got to wind down, get all those, social media devices away from you so you can just be in tune with your family and particularly with your children. And if you have elderly parents, they're going to need your full attention. So your mediation role play was very dear to my heart, as it was with one of the chat members, is that if you've been in real time with the do not respond, DNR on file, then that is something that you got to focus in on. So you're still juggling all the multiple tasks, you still all have this friction, but you got to slow down and you got to be in the moment.
Before you move forward, Dr. McBride, what I'd like to also say about that is that valuing the need. Someone in the chat said earlier about their leaders having time. When you want to have a real conversation, set a real time. I don't want to pass you in the hallway for this conversation because I value this. And sometimes when you make an appointment, it puts a different value on what you're about to talk about. So you may want to just set a scheduled time and ask your director, your boss, your leader, your husband, your wife, whoever, could we have a conversation? We need to talk. Often when we schedule conversations, people start thinking in terms of, well, what this is going to be about. Wonder what they're going to talk to me about, because they start getting nervous because they recognize that this is serious. So you have to sometimes just schedule yourself and schedule that person to let everybody understand the importance of how important this conversation is that we need to have.
So we're going to move on to this as we get to the closing, but how does our communications impact our outcomes? And so I'm just curious, from those that are participating today, have you ever experienced unintended consequences when you were desperately trying to communicate with someone, like a colleague, patient, one of your family members, about something? Was it unintended? What was the unintended consequences? And what we're saying is we're getting to intent versus impact. So you must understand the difference between intent, which is what you meant to say, and the impact and how it lands on others. For example, you have a friend that makes a joke that makes you upset. It upsets you. You know that they didn't mean any harm, but it still stings. Ouch. Or in the case of a dear friend or colleague like Jerome, he's always being nice, but if he pours coffee in my cup and it accidentally burns me, then his intent was friendly. while the impact, it was harmful, and now I got to go to the hospital. Thanks, Jerome. So in the chat, I would love to know, have you ever experienced unintended consequences when you really were just trying to communicate with someone in your office, at home, patient, student? Just be curious, and if you can put what happened, it would be great.
Let me address one issue while they're doing that, Lisa, that if you're having that conversation where I said that you need to schedule it, you may want to say, if you're scheduling it, tell them what you like to talk about. Just give them a brief, I'd like to discuss a short sentence about what you want to talk about, and that may help lead the conversation. Sometimes people don't want to talk because they figure that they don't want to tell you what it's about, because they feel it's going to create a lot of different feelings or emotions depending on what the subject matter may be. But you may just want to say that way you don't walk in totally lost as to what this conversation is going to be about, because someone said they got blindsided. Well, you get blindsided, but you know what you can do with those blindsided conversations is still take it back to what you want to talk about, the things that you need to say, because at least you finally have the audience.
And Rosetta, that allows the question, I believe it was from Pamela, about empathy, right? Is that allows you to lean into your humble heart, your empathetic listening, and to read the room, right? Everything is not going to land in the way that it should, but that's when you have to be that authentic leader, that empathetic listener, and be willing to use this next strategy, if you can go there, Jerome. And that is, the strategy is, I call it the XYZ strategy. I feel, and that's when you say X, what happened? I feel, Rosetta, when you made that joke, I felt Y. Because this. So it helps the Y, the XYZ helps express the emotion, and it clarifies the situation without blame. And you may hear someone says, I wish I had your disease so I could lose weight really fast. We know that's an ouch moment. That's the intent versus impact, but you have an opportunity to use this XYZ statement and let the person know how it felt and how it landed. Because I like to think in this country that we all are good people and that no one really wants to harm someone. They're not mean spirit, but they want to just know, oh, I didn't know that's how it makes you feel. That's a big part of facilitating the dialogue, is allowing the other person to say, oh, I didn't know you felt that way, Rosetta. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry.
Yes. And I think that when you say that, it makes me feel a certain way. And that it will at least get the other person to know that you're at least acknowledging the fact that you said something, and I acknowledge the fact that it made me feel a certain way. And I think that as humans, we're okay to say that. We need to say how you made me feel. That's communicating. Because if not, if a person doesn't know exactly how you made them feel, how you made them feel when they said it, they have to do it over and over and over again. I was thinking of when Lisa was talking, I was at a reunion a couple of weeks ago, and the lady, some people had not seen each other in quite a while, and one of the classmates came up to the other and says, are you the same little girl that used to be in Miss Jones' class? And she says, that depends. She said, they went with the conversation. She said, oh, you must have weighed about 300 pounds less then. And so the lady came to the car. She said, and she was pointing to everybody, the lady that made the statement. Well, she didn't recognize sometimes we say things without thinking and not knowing what the impact it's going to have. So I think in practicing communicating, we need to practice how we say certain things when we say it, because sometimes timing is everything when we're talking. It's not so much what you say, but it's the timing of when you said it. And think about how we talk to others, how we talk to people when we have to talk to them, because we found ourselves talking at people, not to people. So when you think about how you talk to others, think about what judgments you bring to the conversation, what judgments you have about other people, because we all bring ourselves to all conversations. And sometimes it's not a pretty self we show up with. Think about your body language and your attention to detail when you're listening to people. When you're listening to people, sometimes it's good to repeat in your brain, not even to them, what they just said. It'll help you move that forward as to what exactly are they trying to say. And think about, how you're going to reach a common goal in the conversation. Where will that take you? And you want to have a conversation, you want to have an understanding. Think about what that looks like. I know we haven't covered a lot of things we could continue to cover by conversations, but I will ask you all to take actions as to how you listen, how you hear, how you communicate, and how you basically dispel your judgments of a conversation before you hear it. Any questions? Any in the chat room?
Well, Rosetta, I love what Sheila said about her trainees and how she's going to implement this. And I appreciate her sharing, her approach, because with trainees, obviously, you have to, remember that, they may not feel competent, but just with your communications, your body language, they're going to feel that what you're really trying to do is teach them to be good trainees and to be effective. And in your leadership, I appreciate it. So thank you all for sharing. This has been remarkable. So thank you, Val and Gary, for having us, and Dr. Yvonne Kaplan-Liss.
Thank you, ladies. This was exciting. I just wanted to say, like, when you came into that role play, Rosetta, even just having a third person there kind of lowered I had to make my case and I had to listen differently. So I had to listen differently to Gary's case. And I think that even just that third presence was so helpful in helping to lower the temperature in the room. And I was able to even think differently about, what he brought up about time. So I really appreciate your expertise and thinking about mediation as something that anybody can do if we just, follow those rules of staying out of judgment, listening actively, and like you said, picking up what the person has put on the table. These are simple skills, but it's very hard to not get wrapped up in the story. So really appreciate.
Now, let me make one quick statement that
Yeah.
I did not cover, and I think it's important for people to know. Silence is golden. It's okay to be in any conversation and people are not saying anything. Just sit in the silence. Because truth be told, silence is often a conversation. So don't think you always have to be talking. Just sit silently, and truth be told, you are really talking then as well.
Yeah, it's a great lesson that we can take into today. Jerome, if you could push forward into the next slide. I just thank you all for coming today. We have more workshops coming down the pike, October 14th. Marcy McGinnis, former Senior Vice President of CBS News, will be with us, helping us think about preparing for a media interview. We have other sessions in November and December. And if you're interested in in-person training, we have a Lead with Compassion workshop, which is a 2-day immersive training. We'd love to see you there if you're a change maker in healthcare and want to think about implementing arts and humanities principles and curriculum in your medical school or institution. We hope you'll join us there. I think as you leave this session, there will also be a survey to kind of solidify what it is that Doctors McBride and Bobo have shared with us today. We hope you'll it's a 3-question survey. It'll take you less than a minute, but we hope you'll do that because it helps us in our programming. And ladies, so grateful for your expertise, your friendship, partnership, all of that. We're thrilled you were able to join us today, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.
Enjoy. Go in communication.